Here's a quick demonstration of how I'm using Word for Windows as a dictation buffer for Mac software. The software I've written is comprised of a few pieces. Several are described in my previous blog post, creating a minimal dictation surface with Word 2013. We've got Windows 7 here in VMware Fusion. We've got Word 2013 with some scripts to make sure it stays in draft mode. And we've got Dragon Medical Practice Edition 2, which uses the same recognition engine as Dragon Naturally Speaking 12. This should all work with earlier versions of Dragon Naturally Speaking or Dragon Medical as well. To this, I've since written a Windows-hosted dictation server in Python with RPyC, which is a simple RPC layer for Python, and it uses Natlink to control Dragon Naturally Speaking and COM to interface with Word 2013. Let me start that now. Here we go. Okay. And this will actually start Dragon Medical or Dragon Naturally Speaking if it's not already running. I've got it running without a Dragon bar because I find the animation in the desktop versions of the Dragon bar a little bit distracting. And I'll wait for that to start here. Close this. You can see Natlink starting here and bringing up its own window. This is, I guess, somehow attached to Dragon Naturally Speaking. I'm not sure how the DLL actually starts running this Python script. But in addition, you can actually have other Python scripts which connect into Natlink. There's some kind of client-server thing going on there. I've had to be a little bit careful with the way that connection happens because although there's the ability to somehow set thread safety on Natlink, every time I try to do that and then I try to actually accept connections to my RPyC server from multiple Python threads, it just blows up. So what I've had to do instead is you can connect to my RPyC dictation server from exactly one thread, which means one connection at a time. But thankfully, given I'm only one person, that is not a problem. I've just had to manage it such that I don't try to connect to Natlink from my Python script from multiple threads. I'm going to close this window because I don't need the output provided by it. All right, so on the Mac side, I wrote some scripts which are triggered with fast scripts and two services which are implemented by a PyObjC application, one of which sends the selected text to the dictation buffer, which is a Word 2013 document for editing, and the other of which provides the contents of the dictation buffer as a service. So let's go here, for example, into Mars Edit, and we'll hit Control Option left bracket, which is what I use for starting to type, and you can see that the text I am dictating as part of the narration for this video is actually going into Word 2013, period. Now, let's try to take this text and put it directly into Mars Edit. Period. So, what I will do is press Control Option right bracket. This will first take VMware Fusion and move it to the background the first time I press it, which I just did there. And the second time I press it, it will trigger the service to insert the text in the dictation buffer into the frontmost Mac text field, which in this case is Mars Edit, period. Let me turn off dictation first so I can stop all my narration from going into the dictation buffer, period. There we go. You can see I've got a growl notification that one of my scripts brings up when I press, in this case, Control Option backtick to toggle the microphone state. If you're halfway through dictating and decide you want to work on something else, you can simply create a new Word document as an additional buffer. So I could go back here to Word, I hit Control N, I get a new Word document, blah, blah, blah. The dictation server only looks at the frontmost document. So if I go back to MarsEdit now, and I hit Control Option right bracket, you can see it simply inserts the contents of the frontmost document. You also notice that the text gets selected because if I try to dictate further, then it will replace the existing text, and I can still undo and so forth if I accidentally replace that text. You've probably seen now there are two ways I dictate. You can dictate in the background, so I can hit Control Option backtick, and I can now dictate here in the background while keeping the current Mac application in the front. Or I can dictate in the foreground, and the way to dictate in the foreground is by hitting Control Option left bracket, and if I have some text selected, that will actually use the other service to take that text and put it into Dragon Naturally Speaking. The other usefulness of the dictate in foreground is that you can send keyboard commands to Word for Windows or to the Dragon software to train a word and so forth. In place of this dedicated microphone that I saw in use with PowerScribe, I use these keyboard commands, and personally I actually find this preferable as I've usually got my hands on the keyboard even when I'm dictating. So far we've seen dictation into MarsEdit. Unfortunately, not even all of Apple's applications play well with services that try to provide text. I've had to implement a couple of workarounds for Safari and Mail, which you'll find as additional scripts in the GitHub repository. Safari doesn't seem to support service-provided text, so I have to use the clipboard instead. This does overwrite the clipboard, but I have LaunchBar providing clipboard history, so if this overwrites something, I can get it back easily. Mail does support inserting text via services, but it is oddly deaf to the server's keyboard equivalent, so I wrote a short Apple script that uses accessibility to trigger the service menu item when FastScripts intercepts the keyboard equivalent. I hope this brief demonstration has given you some idea of how this somewhat complicated and many moving parts system works quite well and efficiently to allow me to use Microsoft Word in Windows with VMware with Dragon Medical Practice Edition 2 as a dictation buffer for Mac software.